Hello audio geeks and sonic freaks. Today I'm going to show you how I went from this to this. I'd like to thank Creative Scotland for supporting this project. I have been beefing up my drums in this track. I started with a very simple setup. I played the real kit. I had one mic inside the kick drum, one mic underneath the snare drum, and two overhead microphones. What I've done in this project is I have layered those up with other kick drums and snare drums and drum loops. So I'm going to go through all my EQ and effects settings and all the different sounds that I used and how I decided on the kit pieces that I ended up using. Let's start with the kick drum. I'm going to solo that track, which is just here. Let's zoom in a little bit on the vertical scale. Opening my kick drum track. If I bypass the EQ, it's going to sound like this. It doesn't sound great. I recorded it about 12 years ago, I think. Let's hear it with the EQ on again. That's significantly tighter, and I also opted not to use a gate. I don't really like gates on kick drums. If I'm going to gate a kick drum, I prefer to do that manually by chopping the event with maybe a pair of scissors like this. I could just cut out the end of the kick drum, for example, and I'd go along doing that. I think that sounds much better than using a gate. Let's move on to the live snare drum. There is some noise coming in at the bottom. That's coming from this Red 17 plugin, which I'm using to add a bit of distortion. You'll see in all the snare drums I've used, I've pretty much added a fair bit of gain, either with compression or distortion, or perhaps the sound that I used was compressed or distorted to start with. I did gate this track. Let's bypass the EQ and Red 17. Let's go back. We'll also bypass the gate and the reverb. So there's a nice bit of snare buzz coming off that snare. I mean, I like those kind of buzzy snares, but it does sound a bit thin. Let's put the gate on and the EQ on, and now let's hear it with this Red 17 on. Quite a subtle difference, but once the snares are all layered up together, it just gives it that bit of extra body. And finally with the reverb again. I did grow up listening to 90s metal, so I do quite like my long reverbs on my snares. Let's take a look at the overhead microphones. I've paired these as a stereo track. Not too much happening here. High pass filter and a bit of high-end EQ. That's because the room that I recorded them in isn't quite bright enough. And EQ number 2 here was just notching out a frequency that was becoming too prominent when EQs 3 and 4 were adding that really high end in. Got a bit of reverb on here as well. So let's just hear it without the EQ and without the reverb. That's actually a pretty decent sound. It's quite tight. That's because the room I recorded the drums in is quite small. Let's whack this reverb on again, and the EQ, and let's hear the difference. So that's really bringing out the high end quite a lot, but in context it actually sounds pretty good. So that covers the three elements of the live drum kit. Next I'm going to show you what these kicks sound like layered up together, and what I did to choose my second kick. So I've got two kicks here. My second kick sounds like this. And that track just has a little bit of EQ added to bring out the clickiness of the kick drum. That just helped it cut through the track a little bit more. I'll show you how I chose this kick drum. I loaded up Addictive Drums. That's the kick drum there, so if I move this out the way, it's just playing off this MIDI track here. So what I actually did is scroll through the presets with the track playing, and I went through them all until I chose my favourite one. I'm going to play the track just with the live kit and that one kick drum in it. That Tama Star Classic is sounding pretty nice. It's quite loud though. I think when I turned that down in volume it didn't quite work. But that is how I chose my second kick. And don't forget there are some more kicks in these two drum loops. Let's look at the snare next. Now I chose another two snares in exactly the same way. There is one other technique that I like to use to double up my drum sounds that I'll get to in a moment. Let's hear these other two snares. And let's strip back this VST kind of valve gain as well. Let's switch that off. Back on again. It might sound very subtle, but it did give the track a lot more punch, and the drums change from this weak beat into this thing that really drives the track along. I won't bother with the EQ, that's quite minimal. Next snare. Again, not too much EQ on this. I've used the same The Tube plugin, that's a Steinberg plugin that I missed because they skipped it out for a few versions, but it's quite a nice simple overdrive. It does colour the sound, it doesn't always work. Quite a lot of distortion all in all on that snare. So I've got this free plugin, it's called Grace Sampler. I can just solo my live drums and also solo the Grace Sampler. Click on a sample, you get to hear it. It's running on a MIDI track here. so I could just go through those until I was satisfied with the snare that was doubled up. Like I said, I used addictive drums for the snare as well. I just wanted to show you Grace Sampler. Let's have a look at my drum loops. I wanted a kind of breakbeat thing happening. Again, I'm using the tube bit again, and I am using S1 Imager. Without it, it wasn't quite sitting in the right pan position. Let's bypass the EQ and the effects to show you the difference there. I'm not sure how much of that filtered reverb I'm going to leave in yet. I'm still deciding. I did want to do this high pass quite a lot because there's a bunch of kick drums going on and I didn't want to overload the low end. And I have one more drum loop. Actually, I should mention what I did was the beats weren't exactly the same as my track, but I ended up cutting them up manually and copying the beat that I played on the live kit originally. So here is the second drum loop that I'm using. That is sounding pretty evil. Nice, let's hear it without the distortion. You could hear the EQ was pretty important on that one, especially this notch here at 8.4 kilohertz. So there we go, that's all the different elements that I used to create this drum sound. I don't think I played it with the whole track yet. So just to finish up with this video, I'm going to play it just with the live drum sound and then with the doubled up drums. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got any questions, do let me know in the comments. Right, let's hear this.